My boyfriend, 41M, is charging me, 36F, 75% of his mortgage to live with him. About 7 months ago I moved in with my boyfriend into the house he owns. Before I moved in, we decided I would pay rent. We would split utilities, and he would pay for repairs. The rent rate we decided on. His idea was to look up on Zillow what rent would be if he rented his house out. And I would pay half of that. Keep in mind that we live in California and renting is very expensive. If I'm being honest, I was a little irked that he even wanted to charge me rent at all. Especially market rate. But the rate was 30% lower than I was paying at my last apartment. And I was embarrassed that I thought I deserved to live rent-free. So I agreed to it. Things have been going really well for us in our relationship and in our living situation. Fast forward to now, I just learned that I'm paying 75% of his mortgage. I immediately felt like I was being taken advantage of. I earn far less than he does and have taken on a lot of the housekeeping chores. We talked about things and he maintained that that method of calculating rent still seemed the fairest. He said that there's other costs to owning the house, like taxes and insurance, and he's not charging me that. He also made the argument that if he had a less favorable mortgage it would be unfair to pass that along to a renter. For example, if he opted to put less down when he bought it, his mortgage would be much higher. I made the argument that I don't receive any of the benefits of owning the home, like equity, and could have rented an apartment nearby for only slightly more. I think what bothered me most about the conversation was that he never suggested we lower my rent. Not that I necessarily would have taken him up on the offer. It just felt like a business negotiation, not a conversation between partners. I can't help but feel icky about the situation, but I don't want this to become a thing in our relationship. Do I accept it and move on, or do I stand my ground? I immediately felt like I was being taken advantage of. Because you are. Having your partner pay 75% of your mortgage is ridiculous behavior. And no, his method is not fair. He's not entitled to half of what he would earn if he was renting out the whole house instead of living there. That's insane. You're also right that you're not the one getting any equity from this. His idea that he's being nice by not having you split the taxes and insurance too is a clear indication that he either doesn't know anything about home ownership or is willfully using you. You need to find a new place to live and you need a new boyfriend. Move out. There is paying rent versus being used. He is using you. At the very least I'd stop doing any household management for the person who's treating you like a roommate. Start there. You can tell him you don't do chores for roommates, and since you're paying more of the mortgage than he is, maybe he needs to do your chores. Charge him for housekeeping. Why are you doing most of the housework? It sounds like he's happy to have his little bangmaid take care of his home and most of his mortgage. I think you'd be nuts to accept it and move on, but only you can decide that. Move out. Okay, so what is fair is simply what is agreed. I think both of you are a bit off the mark here. First of all, you're saving money living there. Sickney, you got to reduce your rent from your previous place. Second, you agreed to the amount. If you didn't think the amount was fair, you should not have agreed to it. The amount of the mortgage is really not important for what is a fair amount. On the other side, he should have disclosed the mortgage rate to you initially, because I think emotionally it makes a big difference. And he knows that, because if he didn't, I don't think it would be an issue. Your BF is right about another thing though. I have a couple of houses and the mortgage portion, principal plus interest, is actually less than 50% of expenses for my houses. The taxes and insurance are about 30% and general maintenance and unexpected major repairs. New roof, rebuilding rotted porch, leaky pipe replacement, foundation stabilization, is the rest. Also, the mortgage payment is dependent on how much the down payment was. If he put down a ton of money on the house, like 20% plus, then the mortgage will be lower, yet he still paid for the house in money that is gone. And that needs to be taken into account. For example, if he paid for the whole thing in cash and the mortgage was zero, obviously it would not be fair of you to pay zero for rent even though the mortgage was zero. Which is really just another way of saying the fair rent for you to pay really shouldn't depend on what the monthly mortgage amount is by itself. How much down payment did he put? Property taxes and home insurance are a big part of the cost, so if the rent is not higher than the half of the expenses and not higher of the half of the rent you would pay if you rented the house, it sounds fair. You should pay the lowest of all these two since you do not have the benefits of house ownership. The deal does not sound bad except for the fact that there is no reason you should do more chores. In the long term, I would expect these expenses to be adjusted by income levels. If you got married, but so far deal sounds okay. How is it not a good deal when you're paying less rent than you were before? But stop doing more of the chores immediately. That's ridiculous. A few years ago my now wife and I were in the same situation that you're in right now. My 2-bedroom house was bigger than her 1-bedroom apartment, so we agreed that we'd treat it as if I were moving into her apartment and we split the rent. So she paid the amount of half of her rent. Both of us thought that was fair. I didn't need any money from her, but she also wasn't one to freeload. Have you thought about the amount you would be okay with paying? I agree that the current setup is not equitable at all and needs to be adjusted. But I think you need to look at what you feel is acceptable based on both your situations. Also, do you take on more chores in the household or are those split evenly? I would say you should be paying 50% of the mortgage and 50% of the utilities at most. He's not your landlord and you're not a tenant. You're a couple in a relationship. This right here is why it's so stupid to live with someone you aren't married to. Look at the mess when everything is not combined. He can charge you whatever he wants because you are his roommate. Lots of people have already stated the facts in this thread. You clearly are not fully educated on what goes into a home purchase. My husband and I put 50% down on our home and our mortgage is low as hell and has nothing to do with what we would ever charge someone to live here. It would be market rate, period. Half of market rate is fair for a roommate situation. You aren't his wife. I don't see an issue here. The mortgage isn't the only expense. As you acknowledge, there are also property taxes and maintenance costs as well as any improvements you may want to make in the future. Repairs should have never even been a part of the deal. It's his house, so the repairs are his and not part of the equation. It shows you how unfairly he is thinking on this. If it were him renting out a bedroom to a random, then it's a great plan. But he's your man and it was his mortgage to begin with. It doesn't sit right with me that he's charging you more than half when you don't even have your own room. Overall, I think it shows his thinking and you should not take him this seriously. He has a very separate and selfish mentality. I only want to be with someone who has my best interest in mind, as well as their own. This guy only has himself in mind. You can see it in the way he thinks and processes. I guess redress it again and say if you're paying more than half of what he is, you're no longer going to take on other responsibilities or something. The reasoning being that when you guys split, you have no rights to this house. Why are you building this situation that is only good for him? I'm afraid years will go by and you finds that you helped pay his home loan down and are left with nothing. Where I live, my taxes make up a greater percentage of my monthly payment than the principal and interest on my mortgage. You might be getting a deal, but just ask him how much all the other bills are, what his monthly expenses are. If you were renting for only a little more somewhere else, you'd be paying for that owner to cover all those expenses, and they'd still be the ones to gain the equity and capitalize on any appreciation. And you still have to pay for all the utilities, etc. I don't know. On the one hand, you may be getting a little deal. On the other hand, you made a sacrifice by giving up your own place. So maybe a question for both of you is, what is the plan for the home, your relationship, marriage, etc.? You may want to have a discussion about him refinancing if rates drop again and you kicking in some principal so you could get on the title at the time of refinancing. Then, you can participate in the appreciation of the asset. He should have asked you what you could afford and then come up with a number you would contribute to the household from there. I personally wouldn't have asked for more than 25% of your income for the household because I'm sure you have bills of your own to pay. Plus you cook and clean, household chores. So I would have given you the girlfriend rate. You can't be compared to a normal tenant because you do far more than what a normal tenant does. You are his girlfriend, and as such you bring the girlfriend experience to the picture. You may want to ask him to make an adjustment to the arrangement. I think that's totally fair. As you said, he's covering taxes, home maintenance, etc. Either take the deal you have or you have to split everything. The mortgage payment is irrelevant. Taxes and insurance have to be factored into the costs of home ownership. Op is fixated on the number of the mortgage payment as if it's the only cost of owning a home. Op wrote it pretty clearly. She felt she should live there for free. If that's what you want, you should find a different guy. This one sounds too fiscally responsible for you.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.